is Trevor. This happened back in 2003, but I'd say I can still recall most of the night pretty clearly. It was mid-September, and I had just started my first real job out of college, working IT support for a manufacturing plant in Wichita, Kansas. I'm originally from Ohio, and honestly, Kansas wasn't my first choice, but the pay was decent, and I needed to start somewhere. I was 23 at the time. The people I spent most of my time with were two co-workers named Daniela and Marcus. We don't really talk anymore, but for those first few months, the three of us hung out constantly. It was a Friday night in late September when Marcus suggested driving out to Salina to catch a midnight showing of some horror movie that wasn't playing anywhere in Wichita. Daniela and I didn't have anything better to do, so we said sure. Marcus had a Jeep Cherokee, so he volunteered to drive, and we left around 10 that night. Maybe 40 minutes into the drive, we were on a fairly desolate stretch of I-135 when Daniela pointed something out. Up ahead on the shoulder, there was a sedan with its hazard lights blinking. As we got closer, I could see a figure standing next to the driver's side door, waving both arms over their head like they needed help. It looked like a woman based on the build, but it was hard to tell in the dark. Marcus slowed down slightly, and I could tell he was debating whether to stop. Daniela said we should at least pull over and ask if they needed us to call someone. But something about the whole setup felt wrong to me. The car didn't look broken down. The hood wasn't up, and the hazards were the only lights on. The person was waving, but their movement seemed too energetic, too rehearsed. Marcus must have felt the same way because he sped back up and kept driving. As we passed, I turned around to look, and the person had stopped waving. They were just standing there watching us drive away. Then they pulled out what looked like a phone or a radio and held it up to their face. A few minutes later, Marcus checked his rearview mirror and his face changed. He told us there was a car coming up behind us without headlights on. I turned around, and sure enough, there was a dark sedan approaching fast. Daniela asked if it was the same car from the shoulder, and Marcus said he thought so. The sedan got closer and closer until it was only a few car lengths behind us. Then it turned its headlights on, but they were on high beams and flooded Marcus's mirrors. He had to adjust them just to see. He changed lanes, and the sedan followed. This went on for a couple of minutes, and none of us were talking anymore. I kept watching the car behind us, and I noticed something. There were at least two people in the front seats, maybe more in the back. The passenger in the front leaned out their window at one point and seemed to be looking at our license plate. Daniela pulled out her cell and said she was calling the cops. She dialed and waited, but after a few seconds she pulled the phone away from her ear and looked at it. No signal. We were in a dead zone. Marcus told her to keep trying. Then the sedan did something that made my stomach drop. It pulled into the left lane like it was going to pass us, but instead of passing, it matched our speed and started drifting toward us. Marcus had to swerve onto the shoulder to avoid getting sideswiped. The sedan corrected and fell back behind us again. Daniela was gripping the door handle, and Marcus was white-knuckling the steering wheel. Marcus saw a sign for an exit coming up in 2 miles. He stayed quiet and kept his speed steady like nothing had changed. The sedan stayed right behind us. Then, at the last possible second, Marcus cut across 2 lanes and took the exit without signaling. The sedan tried to follow, but it was going too fast and missed the turnoff. I watched through the rear window as it flew past the exit. By the time it could have circled back, we were already heading down back roads toward a more populated area. We ended up pulling into a 24-hour diner parking lot just outside of Salina, sat there for about 20 minutes to make sure we hadn't been followed. Daniela's hands were shaking when she tried to light a cigarette. None of us said much. Eventually, Marcus suggested we just head back to Wichita and forget the movie. We all agreed. The drive back was tense. Every set of headlights that appeared behind us made my heart rate spike. But nothing followed us. We made it back to Wichita a little after 1 in the morning. Marcus dropped us off, and we all went home. The 3 of us didn't really talk about it much after that night. I think we all just wanted to move on and pretend it didn't happen. Part of me wondered if we were overreacting, if maybe it was just some drunk driver or someone messing with us. It wasn't until about 10 days later that I saw something that changed my mind. I was eating lunch in the break room at work when the local news came on. A reporter was talking about a couple from Nebraska who had been attacked on I-135 north of Wichita. According to the story, they had stopped to help what they thought was a stranded motorist and were robbed at gunpoint. The victims were treated for minor injuries and released. What made me go cold was the next part. The suspects had fled in a dark-colored sedan that was later found abandoned near Salina. Authorities were still searching for the individuals involved. I immediately went to find Marcus and Daniela. The three of us watched the news segment again online and agreed that we needed to report what happened to us. We went to the local police station that evening and told them everything. The officer taking our statement didn't say much, just wrote it all down, and said they'd pass it along to the investigators handling the case. I never heard anything after that. No follow-up calls, no updates. For all I know, they never caught the people responsible. Even now, I think about how close we came that night. I think about what would have happened if Marcus had stopped to help, or if he hadn't seen that exit when he did. I still take road trips, but I don't drive that stretch of highway at night anymore. I'm not really the type to share personal stories online. I've never posted on Reddit before, never left reviews, nothing like that. But what happened to me a few years back has been weighing on me, and I guess I just need to get it out somewhere. If nothing else, maybe it'll help someone else avoid the same mistake I made. This was back in late 2016. I was driving overnight from Spokane, Washington to visit my sister in Salt Lake City, Utah. I just finished a double shift at the distribution center where I worked and figured I'd rather drive through the night than waste my only 2 days off sitting in traffic. I was 28 at the time and probably way too confident in my ability to stay awake behind the wheel. I left around 11 at night with a thermos of coffee and a bag of gas station snacks. Somewhere in southern Idaho. Maybe 3 hours into the drive, I stopped at a rest area to use the bathroom and stretch my legs. It was one of those small roadside stops with a couple of vending machines and fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly. There were only 2 other vehicles in the lot when I pulled in. One was a semi-truck, parked off in the corner with the cab dark, and the other was a minivan closer to the building. I went inside, used the bathroom, and was walking back to my car when a woman approached me from the direction of the minivan. She looked frazzled, maybe in her late 30s, with her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She asked if I had any duct tape. Her son had kicked a hole in the door panel of her van, and she wanted to cover it before they kept driving. I told her I didn't have any, and she looked genuinely disappointed. She thanked me anyway and walked back toward her van. I got in my car and left without thinking much of it. I made it maybe another hour down the road before I got pulled over. I wasn't speeding or driving erratically, so I had no idea why. The trooper walked up to my window and asked for my license and registration. I handed them over and asked what I'd done wrong. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked me to step out of the vehicle. My heart started pounding. He walked me to the back of my car and pointed at my rear bumper. My license plate was missing. I stood there staring at the empty bracket where my plate should have been, completely confused. The trooper asked when I'd last checked it, and I told him honestly that I had no idea it was gone. He asked where I'd stopped recently. I mentioned the rest area. He told me to wait by his patrol car while he checked my information. After maybe 10 minutes, he came back and said my registration checked out, but that I couldn't keep driving without a plate. He wrote down the name of a nearby town where I could get a temporary tag in the morning and told me to find a motel for the night. I asked if he thought someone had stolen it, and he said it happens sometimes. People take them to avoid tolls or to cover their own plates if they're up to something. I was furious, but there wasn't anything I could do. I drove to the town he'd mentioned and found a cheap motel. The whole thing felt wrong. Why would someone steal a license plate at a random rest stop in the middle of the night? The next morning, I went to the DMV and paid for a replacement plate. It took most of the day to get everything sorted, and by the time I was back on the road, I'd lost an entire day of my trip. I made it to my sister's house that evening and tried to put the whole thing behind me. About a week later, I was back home in Spokane when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a detective from the Idaho State Police. He asked if I'd reported a stolen license plate recently, and I said yes. Then he asked where I was on a specific date and time. I told him I'd been at work, which I had been. He asked if I could prove it, and I said I could get my timesheets. He told me someone had used my plate during an armed robbery at a convenience store in Boise. The car was caught on surveillance, and my plate was clearly visible. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I explained everything about the rest stop and the woman and the trooper pulling me over. The detective listened and said he'd look into it. But in the meantime, I needed to send him any documentation I had. I sent him the police report from when I got pulled over, my replacement plate receipt, and my work schedule showing I'd been in Spokane at the time of the robbery. He said it would take some time to verify everything, but that I shouldn't worry. Except I did worry. For the next 2 weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Someone had stolen my plate and used it to commit a crime. And if the detective hadn't believed me, I could have been arrested. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. This wasn't random. Someone at that rest stop had targeted me specifically. I started going over every detail of that night in my head. The woman with the minivan, the semi-truck in the corner, the empty parking lot, and then it hit me. The woman had asked me for duct tape. Not help with her van, not jumper cables, not directions, duct tape. Why would she need duct tape specifically, unless she was planning to attach something to something else, like a stolen plate to her own car? I pulled up a map and found the rest area where I'd stopped. Then I started searching for surveillance footage or news reports from that area around that time. I didn't find much, but I did find a local news article about an uptick in license plate thefts along that specific stretch of highway. According to the article, thieves were targeting out-of-state plates and using them to commit crimes in other states before ditching them. It was a whole operation. I called the detective back and told him what I'd found. I also described the woman in the minivan in as much detail as I could remember. He seemed interested but didn't make any promises. I figured that was the end of it. Then, about 3 weeks later, the detective called me again. He told me they'd arrested 2 individuals in connection with a string of robberies across Idaho and Utah. One of them was a woman matching the description I'd given. Apparently, they'd been working together, stealing plates from rest areas and using them during robberies before destroying the plates and moving on. My plate had been recovered from a dumpster behind a gas station in Boise. He thanked me for the information I'd provided and said the case was closed as far as I was concerned. I never got any more details than that. And honestly, I didn't want them. I was just relieved it was over. But the whole thing changed the way I think about road trips. I don't stop at isolated rest areas anymore, especially at night, and I check my license plate every single time I get back in my car. It sounds paranoid, but after what happened, I'd rather be paranoid than naive. I was driving through northern Nevada with my coworker Miguel after we'd spent the day at a work conference in Reno. The original plan was to get a hotel and drive back to Carson City in the morning, but Miguel had an early shift and wanted to get home. I offered to drive since he'd driven us there. We left around 11 at night. About 40 minutes in, I missed our exit. I didn't realize it until we were already another 10 miles down the highway. Miguel was half asleep in the passenger seat, so I just took the next exit and figured I'd loop back around. GPS said there was a route that would get us back on track, some county road that cut through and reconnected to the main highway further up. The road started out fine, paved and marked, but after a few miles it turned to gravel. Then the gravel got rougher. I slowed down because I didn't want to kick up rocks and crack the windshield. Miguel woke up and asked where we were. I explained and he pulled out his phone to check the route. No service. He told me to just turn around, but I was stubborn. The GPS showed we were more than halfway through the shortcut and turning around would add another 30 minutes. We kept going. The road narrowed and trees started crowding in on both sides. Then I saw lights up ahead. As we got closer, I could make out 2 trucks parked across the road, nose to nose, completely blocking it. I slowed to a stop maybe 50 feet back. Miguel sat up straight. There were people standing near the trucks, 3 or 4 of them, but I couldn't see clearly because of the headlights. One of them started walking toward us. Miguel said we should reverse and get out of there. I put the car in reverse and started backing up. But before I could turn around, I saw headlights coming up the road behind us. Another truck. It stopped right behind us, blocking us in. The guy who'd been walking toward us reached my window. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, wearing a Carhartt jacket and a knit cap. He motioned for me to roll down the window. I cracked it an inch. He said the road was closed for logging work, and we'd need to turn around. I told him there was a truck behind us and he glanced back, then said they'd move it in a minute. Something about the whole setup felt wrong. Logging work at midnight? Miguel was staring straight ahead, not saying anything, but I could see his hand gripping the door handle. The guy asked where we were headed and I told him Carson City. He nodded and said we'd taken a wrong turn, that this road didn't go through anymore. Then he asked if we had a map or GPS. I said GPS but no service. He offered to show us the way back on his phone and reached for the door handle. Miguel snapped. He yelled at me to drive. I didn't think, just stomped on the gas. The guy jumped back and I swerved around him, aiming for the gap between the 2 trucks blocking the road. It was tight, but I thought we could make it. We didn't. I clipped the front bumper of one of the trucks and it spun us sideways. The airbags didn't deploy, but the impact jolted us hard. Miguel hit his head on the window. I threw the car back in drive, but the engine was making a horrible grinding noise and we weren't moving right. The front end was damaged. People were running toward us now while shouting. Miguel was holding his head, but he looked at me and said to run. We both threw our doors open and took off into the trees. It was so dark I could barely see 3 feet ahead. Branches whipped across my face and I kept stumbling over roots and rocks. I could hear Miguel crashing through the brush behind me and voices shouting somewhere further back. Someone had a flashlight, sweeping through the trees. I dropped down behind a fallen log and Miguel dove in next to me. We stayed low, trying to control our breathing. The flashlight beam passed overhead, then swung back. I heard boots crunching through the underbrush getting closer. A voice called out that they just wanted to help, that we'd damaged our car and shouldn't be out here alone. The tone was calm, almost friendly, which made it worse. The footsteps stopped maybe 20 feet from where we were hiding. The flashlight clicked off. Everything went silent. Miguel grabbed my arm and we both stayed frozen. A full minute passed, then another. I couldn't hear anything except my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Finally, I heard the footsteps moving away, voices in the distance calling to each other. Miguel whispered that we should keep moving, get further away. We stayed low and worked our way deeper into the trees, moving as quietly as we could. We must have walked for over an hour, just picking a direction away from the road and hoping it led somewhere. Eventually, the trees thinned out and we hit another road, this one paved. Miguel's phone had 1 bar of service. He called 911 and told them what happened, gave them the approximate location of the logging road and our current position. The dispatcher said she was sending units and to stay where we were. 2 sheriff's deputies picked us up about 30 minutes later. We explained everything and they drove us back to the logging road. Our car was still there, smashed up and empty. The trucks were gone. The deputies called it in, and more units showed up. They searched the area but didn't find anyone. One of the deputies told us that road had been used for illegal dumping in the past, and that people sometimes set up roadblocks to rob travelers who got lost. He said we were lucky we didn't stop or get out when they asked. They impounded our car as evidence and drove us back to Carson City. A detective called me a few days later. They'd found tire tracks and some evidence at the scene but no suspects. He said the case was still open but didn't sound hopeful. Miguel ended up needing stitches for the cut on his head, and both of us missed a week of work dealing with insurance and police reports. I never take shortcuts anymore, and if I see anything blocking a road at night, I turn around immediately. I don't care how much time it adds.